Ladies and gents, I can't tell you what a delight it is to be here tonight with a properly fascinating guest and a properly good friend of World Jewish Relief. I looked at the advert for this online just before we came out, and it says there on the little blurb, Jerry Springer in conversation with the BBC's Emily Maitlis, engaging, charismatic, sometimes controversial.
What about me?
And I beamed. There you go. You see, I was like, I'm not that controversial. I think they meant you. I was, you know. The last time I talked to Jerry Springer was November the 9th, 2016, which for some of you will just be a date in the calendar, and for others, it will click as the moment that America underwent the most seismic change, a shifting, as we used to say, of the tectonic plates in the electing of Donald Trump as its new president. And I remember our chat very well that night. Jerry said, America is a journey. Sometimes you get a bit lost. Now, that was a phrase that stayed with me, and we're going to discuss that later. But Jerry, as you all know here, is a one-word fame man. When people shout Jerry, they only mean one man. He's achieved international fame with the Jerry Springer Show, but he's here tonight, or here at all, you might say, because of the remarkable actions of World Jewish Relief nearly 80 years ago, which you are all here supporting. We're so grateful for that. Jerry's parents, German Jews, were brought to safety in the UK in 1939 by World Jewish Relief, or CBF as it was then. Jerry was to lose 27 members of his family in the Holocaust. And tonight we're going to start by talking about that initial journey, about his time in politics as Cincinnati mayor, as well as, hopefully, a chance to catch up with where the Jerry Springer thinking is today and your understanding of the world. So please give him a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much.
And since we're in a sort of dinner party setting, Jerry, we're going to start with an English game, a sort of radio game, where you have to name your favourite tube station in London. What would that be?
Well, Highgate, and because Mom told me that that's where I was born. And I was born in the tube because oftentimes women in their 9th month would spend the night, as you know, in the subway stations, because those were bomb shelters or whatever. And I was born at 11:45 at night. So that's where I was born, and so every time I hear a train go by, I still, but I can't tell you that I remember it. But I did go by there, and I don't see a plaque, and it's
we
kind
need
of
to
annoying.
Get you one of those blue
I would
plaques.
think that's the least you could do. Yeah.
And London has remained very much in your affections. You grew up
I love
here,
it.
right?
Yeah, I'm an Anglophile, and I love London, and I'm here several times a year, every year of my life, really. So, no, this is a very special place, and obviously, you're going through a real difficult time now. And, you know, maybe what's happening is because you're such an open city. You're such a, you know, when I think of the two favorite cities, at least in my life, are New York and London. You know, international cities, exactly what a city ought to be if you were creating the world from scratch, you know, other than your traffic. This is... you know, this is what it ought to be. The ethnic diversity, multiculturalism, it's beautiful. And so when it gets damaged, you know, it just seems to me, wow, we got to defend this. I mean, it's not just the physical nature of it, but to defend the whole concept and not let momentary fear change what we ought to be. And I feel comfortable. I certainly believe that in America, and right now, that's a real struggle, trying to save our multiculturalism. But I feel very comfortable saying it here in England, in Great Britain.
Because you still feel like the product of refugees, do you?
Yeah.
And your parents were brought here under what circumstances?
Well, as you mentioned, I lost most of my family in the Holocaust. And Mom, and everyone, by the time 1939 was coming around, Jews were trying to get out. I mean, by that time, it became clear that things weren't going to get better. You know, in the early years of Hitler, there was a lot of rationalization going on. Well, you know, don't worry, we're a cultured society. This isn't, you know, it's just a momentary blip. It's not going to be permanent. Things will work out. Well, by 1939 and after Kristallnacht of November of 38, it obviously became clear that you had to get out. But it was very difficult to get out because the United States included, you know, there were quotas. And it was very difficult for, you know, a lot of countries were only accepting a certain number of Jews. And England came through for, you know, everyone in my family was trying to get out. And my grandparents, they, you know, they said to their kids, as we all would say to our kids, you go, you know, you got to go first. And they did. And so they got the visas. And the reason I'm here tonight is, and this is a general rule that I always follow, if somebody saves my life, I always show up at their dinner. You know? It's just, you know, it's like, you know, yeah. It's just, yeah. So,
one of the most
so they signed, and one last thing on that, they signed, the World Jewish Relief, they signed the visa because you needed a sponsor, otherwise you weren't permitted into England. And a Mrs. Goldberg signed it because you guys showed us the records when the BBC did the program on my life. A Mrs. Goldberg, and no one in my family knew a Mrs. Goldberg. So it either was a fictitious name, which you were just using so to get as many Jews out as possible, or there's a woman we never met, who was responsible for us being able to come to England, and Mom and Dad did. They came the first week of August 1939. As you remember, Hitler went into Poland September 1st to start the war. The gates came down. My parents were among the last 100 people that had visas that got out, according to the numbers on the visas. And a month later, my sister was born, and then during the war, I was born.
And somehow they raised you in North London in what you described as a burden-free existence. That trauma and that tragedy was never passed on.
Never. I mean, I grew up my whole life, as long as they were alive, pretty much, with the faded pictures on the wall, you know, of my grandparents, uncles, aunts, and cousins, but they were just black and white. Some of them were kind of sepia or brown, faded pictures, and it was part of the decor. I'm a kid, what do I know about this? But they never brought that into the life of Evelyn and me. In other words, they didn't want to talk about it. I remember they didn't want to go see Sound of Music because of, you know, the scenes with the Nazis. And I'm not saying that's the way people should handle it, that's the way they handled it. They just couldn't deal with it. Nevertheless, my liberalism and my politics and a fundamental belief system, which started out with me in the civil rights movement in America in the 50s, and then the anti-war movement in the 60s, is all a function of that, because that was just ingrained in our DNA, the idea of social justice, and you never, ever, ever discriminate. I mean, it's just so clear. And what's scary about this time in the world, and certainly in America, is that, oh my God, here we go again. You know, refugees. And by the way, even though each of us here, the Holocaust hits us personally as Jews, we have to remember the lesson of the Holocaust is not about Jews. It's about the idea that you would turn on any group of people because of their religion or because of their race or their ethnicity or where they're from, and you would discriminate them. Because then it was the Jews, and today it might be the Muslims, or in America, the Hispanics, or for years, the African Americans. It's never just us. We, I think, because of what happened to us, have a moral responsibility on this. If we have a reason of being on this planet Earth, it is to let the world know that we will always, always stand up against racism, bigotry, banning people. You know, these same Muslim kids out of Syria that are being bombed and killed and slaughtered. And when we saw the pictures of what Assad did, the gassing of these children, and in America, you know, we say how horrible that was, and then the very next day, the administration says, oh, by the way, those same people are banned from coming to our country. So it drives me insane.
Did the liberalism that we're hearing now, and I'm sure, as you say, has been in your DNA, ever put you at odds with the kind of people that came on the Jerry Springer show, with the kind of voices and the kind of arguments that, you know, you would sit through and encourage and foment day after day? Well,
no, I disagree with some of your adjectives, but we'll deal with that separately. Good question, but okay.
What just happened there? Wait a second, rewind.
Yeah, well, because you say ferment and things like that. But someone earlier in the day asked me the question, you know, gee, you seem like you're a serious person and whatever, and then we watched that show. I am the same person, but like every single human being I know, when you're a grown-up, you behave differently in different situations. So if I'm going out with my friends on a Friday night at a pub, I'm going to have a different behavior than when I'm, let's say, Saturday morning in a temple, or going to a funeral, or you act differently at a ball game than you do at your kid's graduation. In other words, part of growing up is you learn how to behave in social situations. And so I don't want to say that what you see, when you see me on television, I'm any different than I am now. I'm just not as serious. But I'm always dressed in a suit. Yeah. I never curse. I never fight. I never pull people's hair.
But the question was different. The question is, you know, Trump, if you went and lectured the people in your audience about the values of open democracy and letting in refugees and treating everyone equally, then I'm sure a vast majority would agree with them, and a vast, you know, number of them would also say, actually, I don't like being told that's how to think or that's how to act, or, you know, that was a scene in which people's rawest emotions were allowed to come through. I wonder if you felt comfortable always with the kind of, you know, catfights you ended up with.
I like most of the people that come on our show. I mean, I remember once we had a neo-Nazi on. Obviously, I didn't like that person. But generally, at least for the last 20 years of the 27 we've been on, the last 20 years, we're just a circus. So we don't deal with any issue that's important. We deal with dating. And they get angry, but because their girlfriend went out with this other guy. So they fight, they get angry, and the next day they're dating someone else. So we don't even deal with the issue of who's the father, because that's life-changing. We don't deal with on my show, we don't deal with any issue that is life-changing. It's just, and people get angry, etc. But I am not one bit better than anyone who's on the show. And I just got luckier in life. I just dressed better. I had better luck in the gene pool of parents. I was born maybe with a better brain. But that was a gift from God. I didn't decide what it would be like being born, and, you know, what kind of health I would have, and all those things. So there's no difference between the people on the show and me. It's just when we become educated and go through a certain cultural process, we learn how to, in a sense, hide our feelings by the correct language we use and the polite digs we take at people. But honestly, I'm sometimes more comfortable around the people on my show because they can get angry and fight, and when the show's over, they're like everyone else. Jerry, can I have a picture? Will you hold my kid while we snap it? what's a good restaurant to go to around here, around the studio. Honestly, we're all alike. We're not better just because we have more money and we're better educated or whatever. We got lucky, and we know we got lucky. And the more successful we are in life, we know, whew, when we're alone in the room and we're not out in front of anyone else, we're going, oh, the hell, how did this work out for me so well? You know.
I remember when we talked back in November and the rawness of that Trump election was palpable. And I think you'd had a long night, and I know I had. And you said something which was suggestive that too many people had taken, you know, the kind of questioning, the kind of brashness, the kind of sort of discovering your voice too seriously, and that had put Trump where he was. That somehow that had been, you know, a factor, that people had discovered, you know, this was how you get what you want. You know, you fight, you brash, you shout about things, and you end up with Trump as a president.
Oh, you mean because of our show?
Not directly.
Oh, well, no, I mean, look, the show is stupid. And the show it's insane, and it has no social value. It's like chewing gum, you know. It won't save the world. It's not going to destroy it either. No, I will get to that part, I promise you, on the show. No, what happened with Trump isn't about that. It's about resentment, which is the most powerful force in politics. When people, whether it's a minority group, whatever, if people resent the way they are being treated, or they think they're being looked down on, they think they're, you know, they will fight back, and it doesn't matter how logical you are in your explanation, it doesn't matter. And we have a kind of elitism that is going on in America now, which was supposed to not be what we are. You know, our story is supposed to be that we are a classless society. I don't mean a society without class, but I mean a society that isn't regimented according to birth and income and stuff like that. That everybody's just a good old Joe. And we started to move away from that. And on the coasts, and if you watch late night television, which may be the best barometer of where America is culturally, and I love watching those shows, and those comedians are great, but there is no question that the humor in America looks down on people that don't have a lot or aren't living the good high life. And they get it. And there are pockets in this country, in America, that understood that they don't give a damn about our life. They make fun if I'm living on a farm. They're making fun of me if I'm living in a small town. I'm a hayseed. You know, all this kind of stuff. They get it. They know that they're being mocked. And here comes Trump. And it's like when you were a kid in school. There was always some kid in the back of the... I'm sorry, I'm shaking this. There was always some kid in the back of the class who was the bad kid and doing things that you knew were wrong and that would get the teacher going crazy, and you loved it. And you giggled because it was, you know, he was giving the teacher a rough time. Now, you knew that wasn't proper, but you loved it because the teacher was scaring you and this kid was giving it to the teacher with his baby. That's Trump.
That was the right answer then, from the electorate, was it? That if people felt resentful and they felt
Trump
their voices
would blow
were
it up, and they could, it wasn't an issue, it wasn't a logical, look, they're voting against their own interests, logically. These are people that don't have health insurance, and they're voting for someone that is now pushing a plan with the Republican Party that 23 million people are going to lose their health insurance. So it's clearly not in their interest, and they're about to find out. It's not known yet, but they are about to find out that things aren't going to turn around and really be good for them. But they're not at that stage now. This was an anger vote. There was a similar case about 20 years ago. Washington, D.C. had an African-American mayor, elected mayor, and was caught on camera doing cocaine and drug deals. His name escapes me for the moment. Marion Barry. And he was, and clearly, I mean, there was no question of his guilt. In fact, even found guilty, even served time. And then but he ran for re-election. In Washington, D.C., he got 90% of the vote. Why? It basically was the community saying to the establishment, and Washington, D.C. is about 90% African American, but they were saying to the white establishment, the people that lived in Georgetown and then drove around the interstate and went to their real nice suburban community homes, they were saying to, we know what Marion Barry is like. We know you can't believe it. You know it's an embarrassment, but screw you, we're voting for him. It's almost that this is what Trump was. They loved the idea that the worse behavior Trump showed, the more it was to the system, all you well-educated people that are telling us, we don't know, you don't know what you're doing, we know what's best for you.
We voted for a monkey twice as mayor in Hartlepool.
Yeah.
So we get the rebellious vote as well. I don't know if you remember that.
And I think that's really what Trump was about, not any logical thought.
6 months on then, have you changed your view at all of what you imagined Trump would be like? Have there been more redeeming features for you? Has there been reason for optimism in what you've seen?
There is the only things which are, look, I don't hate Donald Trump personally. In fact, there was some time that I worked for him a little bit because I was the host of the Miss Universe pageant in 2008. So he was my boss. And any association I've had with him, he's only been friendly to me. I mean, there's no personal grudge. I mean, if I was his best friend, I would say, Don, what are you doing? Don't go into politics. Live your life. You got a good life. You're happy with what you're doing. It's not my style, but go get them. But don't go into something you don't know anything about, which could hurt other people. I mean, that's my message to Donald Trump. He's in the wrong business. But anyway, my view, optimism. It is right to say, you hope, and everyone says, it's almost a cliche. You know, I'm an American. Of course you want your president to succeed because you want your country to do well. But what Donald Trump wants, some of those things, I don't want him to succeed. And that's not me being un-American. I hope he can keep our country safe. But I don't want him to succeed at banning Muslims. I don't want him to succeed in taking away health insurance from people. Do
you think he'll last the course?
Well, probably, simply because, the only impeachment is a political process which is separate from what happens in courtrooms. You can't prosecute a sitting president for a crime. He can be charged with it, but then he can't stand trial until after his terms are up. So even if they find that he committed some crime, you can't take him to court. So the only remedy that's put in the Constitution is that of impeachment. But impeachment is a political process. It needs, impeachment is basically the indictment. And that can only come from the Congress, which is your parliament. And then the trial is before is that me or no? The trial is before the Senate. Well, both houses are Republican. And at this point, the Republican Congress has not shown any inclination to actually charge Trump, not because they love Trump. They don't. They are tired of walking down the halls of Congress and every reporter is asking him about Trump's latest tweet. It is driving them crazy. So personally, they're not for him. But they also know that people back in their districts may be voting, may be supporters of Trump, and they would jeopardize their own election if they looked like they weren't being loyal to the president of their own party. So I don't think he'll be impeached, so I do think he'll stay.
I'm going to open this up to questions in a moment. We've got roving mics, and I know a lot of you have got thoughts of your own for Jerry. But just before we go, I wonder if you think there'll be a lasting effect of the Trump presidency and what that will be, whether you see it as a backlash against what he stood for or whether you see it as a recalibration, a resetting of the rules, whether it's opened politics up to non-politicians more easily, more celebrities? Is it too early at this point to say what effect he will have on American politics?
He's already damaged us. If it's going to be lasting, will be dependent on whether or not he's ever reelected. And that will be the most important election in our lifetime. Because if he's defeated, then we can look at these 4 years and say it was an aberration. Hopefully no lasting damage was done. But if he is reelected, what that really means is that the presidency and our Constitution is no longer very special. You know, in our lifetime, we have had, obviously, Democrats, Republicans in terms of the presidency, liberals, conservatives. We even had a crook. But we've never had a president who was opposed to the idea America. I mean, no matter how conservative a president was, Ronald Reagan still talked about America, the shining city on the hill. We like to think, Americans, which is a little bit, you know, in our own dream world, but we really kind of think that America is special. And the reason we think it's special, it's the only country in the history of the world that was created by an idea. Every other nation on the planet Earth started out either as a tribe, a race, an ethnic group, and it grew, it wanted a little more land, maybe it wanted access to warm water ports, became maybe an empire, a kingdom, whatever. Every country in the world started like that, except the United States of America started out as an idea articulated in Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, never got to the, you know, that's what I said before, it's a journey. But the goal, the destination, is an absolutely open society where it doesn't matter who your parents were, where you're from, what your ethnic group, how you pray to God, if you pray to God, anything. Welcome to America. The Statue of Liberty is America. And metaphorically speaking, Trump seems to want to take it away and replace it with a wall. That is so un-American. If he gets reelected, I am afraid everything we Americans teach our kids about why this is an important country in the world and what we stand for. Believe me, we make tons of mistakes. But generally, in the end, we come out on the right side of the issue, which is what Churchill said, you know, we try everything. I mean, we do everything wrong, and finally, at the end, we settle on what's right because we tried everything else. So we blunder through, but we get it done. And that's what we Americans got to think our country is. But if we accept Trump as the norm, if we think it's okay for the stars and stripes to mean that it's great if you're white and Christian, but if you're Muslim, not so. If you're Hispanic, not necessarily African American, I mean, just all this stuff. If we suddenly say that that's okay, that it's the norm. I mean, even during the days of slavery, there was a consciousness that slavery isn't going to last. This is morally wrong. It's supporting an economic system in the South, but we got to figure this out. But if we say Trump's okay, then we're saying all this that we taught our kids about America, being that shining city on the hill. No one's dying to get into Syria. I mean, people really do think America is the place. My parents did. One day they'd be able to afford 4 tickets on the Queen Mary. And we came to America. They really believed in this dream. And that's when I get emotional about Trump, he's screwing with that dream. And that's not America.
We've got a few minutes for questions. I'm sure there'll be more hands than
Will I get through
time.
customs?
Not now.
Going home?
So,
I
we
may
can just
have
get
to
one
stay.
mic here. I'll take batches of 3. If you've got one there. I'm looking for some lovely women. Oh, women? Actually, if I'm honest. Come on, women. Yes, there you go. Same table, but there you go.
See.
I've just finished reading a book by Bill Bowder, about Russia and the way they behave in Russia, and it's definitely very un-American. So Donald Trump wants to make America great again, and he seems, if the papers are correct, to be cozying up to Russia. So how do these two apparently opposing views of life reconcile?
Well, they can't be reconciled. Obviously, you'd be crazy to say, of course we want to get along with all other countries in the world at least coexistence. We managed to do it even when we had the Cold War going on. So we want that, but otherwise the systems, Russia's, at least the history for the last 300 years, has always been expansion. Russia's communism was just a form of government that they could use at the time. And so they went with it for 50 years or whatever. But the notion of Russia wanting to expand, to find warm water ports, that has never ended. And that is Putin's goal today. Return Russia to greatness, which means whether it's the Ukraine, whether it's destabilizing NATO, and we have in our country one of Trump's advisors, and who am I thinking of?
Flynn or Bannon?
Bannon, right. Bannon has a worldview, and I'm not putting words into his mouth. He's said this in interviews, televised interviews, written articles, etc. He believes that we are ultimately facing the clash of civilizations. And so that's his worldview. And he's a very bright guy. I disagree with him, but that's his worldview. And he believes in order to get America ready for this clash of civilizations, in a sense, we have to have ethnic purity. We have to, that a multicultural society will never be willing to wage a war in the clash of civilizations. We'll never be able to fight it because there'll be mixed loyalties. He and a few people around him were looking for someone to run for president. They needed power. In fact, the first one they went to is the woman who ran for vice president, Sarah Palin. Really, she was the first one they went, and she, of course, self-destructed a couple of weeks after she was named McCain's running mate. So they looked for someone else. And they were looking for an empty vessel. And I don't mean that as a rip on him at this point. What I mean by they looked for an empty vessel, they were looking for someone who they thought could win the presidency, but yet didn't have his or her own political ideas. Because they had the ideology. They knew what they wanted. They needed someone who could win so that they can move into the White House then and get done what they wanted. So think about it. So Bannon puts his support behind Trump. And he's a political genius in terms of how he got it done. And Trump survives 16 other candidates and then he gets to the nomination. Now he just works his way into the campaign so he can be campaign chairman. Then once Trump is elected, he does two things. One, he wants to become his senior advisor, which he becomes, and then he appoints himself to the NSA, National Security Council. So he can be and gets rid of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The leading military people, gets them off the National Security Council and puts himself on. A politician has never been on, a partisan politician. So they were really using Trump. Trump isn't a conservative. Trump is about Trump. Frankly, some of the positions he has sound pretty good to those of us who are Democrats. When he talks about infrastructure, if he really meant it, that's cool. He even said some of the healthcare things. The other day he called it, that proposal is mean. So he doesn't have a philosophy. He reads every speech. You can tell he's reading it like it's the first time he ever read it.
It's more than 140.
And that's how you get Trump. And now, The reason they go to Putin and Russia is because they both have the same goals for different reasons. Bannon wants America to be isolationist and ethnically pure. So he wants America to withdraw from its alliances with other countries, other cultures, and basically, with few exceptions, become isolationist. Putin loves that. Why? Because if America pulls away from NATO, if it pulls away from Europe, if it pulls away from of Southeast Asia and basically says, China, it's all yours, then all of a sudden, Russia can do what it always wanted to do, which is expand and not have the resistance on its borders. That is what is going on. That is the attachment that the administration has to Russia. The criminal stuff will probably wind up being financial dealings. But the political impetus has to do with Bannon's people wanting to be isolationist and ethnically pure, and Russia wanting the ability to expand, so they're very willing to be friendly with Trump.
Let's get a couple more in. I think you've got the mic there, sir.
I have,
Ma'am, great, Sally.
I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the liberal society in America that caused Trump to come to power. Because it seems to me that there's a huge amount, as you alluded to, of disaffection and of inequality and very, very unhappy people who decided that they would vote for Trump with the chance that possibly he was going to make America great again. And yes, he has now turned out to be racist and ill-advised and not a great politician, but he didn't cause the divides that caused his election. And equally, there was someone standing against him who didn't win the charms of the nation. And could you explain or give me a reason as to why you think it was that the vote didn't come through for Hillary, and also what you really see as a liberal America and an equal America and a great country? Because it seems to me that there actually are a huge amount of deep-seated problems there.
Okay. So just to distill that down, Hillary didn't get the liberal vote, or not enough of it. You could argue in numbers maybe she did. And where does that liberal idea of America break down in terms of what it delivers, I guess, for the people on the ground?
Okay, it's a country of 320 million people. So even when someone gets wiped out in an election, they still have gotten millions and millions and millions of votes. So when we talk about America being liberal, I'll start like this. I have a company that does my podcast, and the name of the company is Liberals Always Win. And because the arc of history is such that over every 10 years, the world and certainly American politics and society becomes more and more liberal. And in the beginning, conservatives fight it, and then ultimately the liberals win. That doesn't mean every election, but generally we win. So in the beginning, conservatives fought against civil rights. In the beginning, conservatives fought against Social Security. Conservatives fought against Medicare. In the beginning, they fought against women's rights. In the beginning, they fought against gay rights. Every 10 years in American history, certainly since 1933, America winds up as a culture being more liberal than the 10 years before. Every generation is more liberal than their parents. Even in the most conservative neighborhoods, the kids are watching the same movies, listening to the same music, doing the same stuff on social media. The first year I did my show, 27 years ago, I did a show on interracial dating. There were protesters outside the studio, protesters on interracial dating. And then 20 years later, we have a president who is the product of an interracial marriage. Clearly, the world overall is becoming, at least the Western world, is becoming more and more liberal. That does not mean that, in other words, I could view the election of Trump as basically white America's last stand against multiculturalism. There were a lot of people that just see the whole world moving away from them. They see all this globalization. They see their kids dating someone of a different religion or a different race. They see gay marriage is suddenly okay. They see all these things happening. They see the music. They see the television shows. They see everything moving to the left. And how do they stop it? How do they stand up and say, we've had enough? And when you look at where Trump's votes came from, they literally came from communities where there are no Hispanics living, where there are no blacks living, where there are no Muslims living. So how did these people even feel threatened by multicultural America? It's just they want to say, time out to this liberalization of the country. You are 100% right that the record is not pure at all. It's a constant struggle. That's what I meant when America is on a journey. The Declaration of Independence and the values in that, that's the destination. We have bumps along the road all the time, but every 10 years, you look at how much closer we're getting to it. I think that's it. And one last thing, and this is quick. Trump is president of the United States because he won the Electoral College. There's several hundred people that vote for the president. He won that. He's the president. But do not confuse that with he speaks for our nation, because he lost the popular vote by 3 million votes, which is not a nail-biter. That's a substantial victory. And beyond that, if you add Comey, and no rational person will say that when the FBI director comes out 11 days before an election and says that Hillary Clinton is under investigation, that didn't affect either people's votes or Democrat votes from deciding to stay home. Obviously, it had some effect. Was it 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, whatever? But even without Comey, America voted for Hillary. The Electoral College didn't, but America did. So I'm not saying Trump's not the president. He's the president. But don't confuse that with, therefore, he speaks for our people. He doesn't speak for all Americans. In fact, he speaks for less than 40% of Americans. Every week, the polls show that.
I could go on all night, and I think much of this room would, but I'm getting those sort of daggers looks now, which means wrap up because your food's getting cold and it will all be ruined.
Oh, you haven't been eating?
No. So we are going to end here with apologies to those who didn't get their chance to ask questions. And I'm sure Jerry is staying for the rest of the meal. I'm sure there will be a little chance to have a word or two in your ear later. But thank you for being such a brilliant audience. I'm sorry we didn't get to more. Thank you
sorry,
so
I didn't realize.
much.
No.